Hello everyone and welcome to my review of the Midnight Masquerade patch. Despite being incredibly light, this upcoming patch is making me debate quitting the game for its life cycle. For context, I have suffered through Release Yagurath, Release Azan, Release 7, and the wretched balancing comboed with the horrible servers from 2020. Needless to say, I'm a pretty resilient Paladins player. None of those frustrating factors could drive me away from this game. Instead, what's threatening my enjoyment in the realm is this upcoming change here. Beginning with the Midnight Masquerade patch, casual modes will be rotated in response to community feedback and fatigue, allowing us to introduce fresh experiences. Siege will always be in no matter what, but the remaining 2 slots will be rotated for the entirety of the Midnight Masquerade patch. Choose Any and Onslaught will be rotated out. Team Deathmatch and Payload will be rotated in. Have fun and let us know how it feels. Anyone who's seen at least one of my Paladins videos knows that I am an Onslaught player. According to Paladins Guru, over 70% of my playtime in this game is from Onslaught. I just love the mode. While Siege is incredibly rigid in how you play, Onslaught is a low-stress environment that allows for lots of experimentation. So many of my staple coordinated strats videos would not be feasible or as enjoyable if they were played in Siege. With the removal of Onslaught this patch, I feel alienated, and I don't want to play the game if it's gone. I want to go back to the dev commentary on this decision. Casual modes will be rotated in response to community feedback and fatigue, allowing us to introduce fresh experiences. Fresh experiences? What's fresh about this? We still have the same stale game modes as before, only now, one of them is missing. One of my biggest complaints with Paladins is the lack of game modes. A sentiment the community seems to share, at least that's how I interpret this community fatigue comment. So, the dev's solution to a lack of game modes in Paladins is to remove one for an entire patch cycle? If you browse any social media page relating to Paladins, you'll more than likely see people commenting that Paladins is dying or being put on life support. Previously, I dismissed these changes because until now, I thought the game was going in a good direction for 2023, by returning an old game mode, bringing back lore stories, and introducing meaningful mid-patch updates. But the introduction of game mode rotations feels very life support-ish. The notes are saying that this will make Paladins feel fresh, but what I see is that Paladins can't afford to have servers hosting 4 game modes at the same time. I'd rather have the current game mode rotation where Siege, Onslaught, and a variation of TDM is always playable. Then, have Payload during the week. Like I mentioned in other videos, I'd rather Payload be playable at all times. But I would rather have all 4 game modes of Paladins be playable for a majority of time, instead of removing one from the game for upwards of 3 months. I know there's plenty of people who do not play Onslaught or don't like it, but imagine if your favorite mode, in any game, was just removed for a patch. I'm also seeing people saying that, oh, TDM should be rotated out instead of Onslaught. No. No one's favorite game mode should be removed for an entire patch cycle. Paladins needs more game modes, not less. Onslaught should remain permanently. I'm already heated and we haven't even gotten to the balance yet. As mentioned earlier, the balance is pretty light this patch. First up, Androxus is getting a buff to Defiant Fist. The bonus damage per weapon shot is going up from 15 to 20%. Even though it will probably still be a meme talent, Defiant Fist surprisingly lost a lot of power with the revolver rework, due to the slower fire rate. Now Androxus can get a fully powered punch from hitting 5 revolver shots. Previously, he would have to hit 7. Next is Ashe with a buff to the Fortress Breaker talent. The bonus shield health is going from 2000 to 2500. Okay, that's nice, I guess. But how about the issue of Ashe dealing so little damage? Why wasn't that addressed? Also, isn't Fortress Breaker already fine as is? Next is Bomb King with a nerf to the Royal Decree card, which gives reload speed after hitting detonate. The percentage is being lowered from 6% to 4%. A 10% reload speed nerf when capped. Boring, next. Furia is getting some talent changes, and yes, they're sticking to their guns when it comes to the idiotic talent passives. First up, Cherish is gaining the Curative passive instead of Remedy. Quick refresher, Curative grants 20% bonus healing, Remedy grants 10% bonus healing, and 5% bonus damage. Now, instead of Kindle Soul having up to 18% bonus healing, depending on the target's missing health, it will now heal allies for an additional 15% of their max health. I know there's a lot of people excited for this change, but I'm a bit skeptical. This sounds to me like Healbot Combat Medic all over again. By itself, on standard health 2200 HP champions, this would add 330 healing to the burst of Kindle Soul. But we have to add in that dumb curative passive. So instead, the healing will be almost 400 extra. 1400 burst healing sounds so fun to fight! But it gets even worse with tanks. A lot of the tanks have 4000 HP. 15% of that is 600. But we got attack on the 20% bonus healing too. So we have the 850 and 600 up front for 1450 burst. And then, add 20% and we have a 1740 burst heal. That sounds so incredibly fun to face. If the stupid talent passives were wiped, I actually think the idea of bonus health based on max HP would be a really cool idea for Cherish. But, due to the dumb passives, this talent has me quite concerned. Next, Solar Blessing is losing Curative but gaining Remedy. And now, Solar Blessing applies a healing over time effect to allies who pass through the beam for 1.5 seconds after leaving its radius, of which I feel is a great change that adds even more depth to Solar Blessing. Now you can intentionally run your beam through multiple allies and then stop it at a choke point, for example. Man, they keep giving Solar Blessing really cool buffs. I gotta start playing with it more. Next is my main, Imani, who is the definite winner of this patch. First, and the most impactful change, the cooldown of Elemental Shift has been lowered from 6 seconds to just 1 second. I love this change. Previously, you would need to dedicate a third of your loadout points to get this effect. I've always been saying if a certain card or talent is required for a champion to be playable, it should be base kit. And while I think Imani was perfectly playable without stance swapping, the character was noticeably designed around the mechanic. With the 1 second cooldown at base, Imani is finally going to live up to the jack-of-all-trades, ready-for-anything playstyle she was meant to have. Imani is going to feel a lot more fluid to play, and this will open up a ton of loadout opportunities. Next, the Frostbomb and Infernal Cannon's cooldown is going down from 15 to 13 seconds. Considering that both of these are Imani's power moves and that they're emphasizing stance swapping more, it makes sense to lower these cooldowns. Next up, the Frostbolts are getting another damage buff, going from 420 to 440 per bolt. This means that the DPS of the bolts is going from 840 to 880 next patch. I would have preferred to have the damage go to 450 for the clean 900 DPS, but I'm not going to be picky with this. Even though her DPS is lower than many others in the damage roster. Keep in mind that Imani is also applying light CC with the slow from the bolts, so I think their lower DPS is fair. Now for some card changes. Since Affinity 5 is going into the base kit, the new card is as follows. Gain 5% scaling damage reduction for 2 seconds after using Elemental Shift. The card will have an internal cooldown of 8 seconds. I'm of an undecided opinion on this card. I think it might not be worth picking because Imani is going to be stance swapping a lot, which will be putting the card on cooldown when you might not want to. And while the 8 second cooldown is fairly short, the DR being noticeable will feel more random as opposed to calculated. But I also think the card might be good, because 25% DR every 8 seconds sounds nice, and survivability is one of Imani's core weaknesses. Definitely gonna have to play around with this card to form a more concrete opinion. Great, another section to update on my Imani guide. Last of the card changes is the introduction of an internal timer to the Discipline, Draconic Will, and Elemental Barrier card. All will now have a 5-second internal timer. My stance on internal timers is that, as mentioned earlier, the benefits of cards with internal timers can feel random, and for that, I'm not a fan of them. In general, with these cards, I would have rather seen their scaling values be drastically lowered, instead of slapping an internal timer on them and calling it a day. This would have kept the playstyle of rapid swapping for cooldown resets, but with lowered numbers, it would have overall been weaker. Keep in mind, while Imani is spamming Elemental Shift, she's outputting no damage. Still, I do want to give my thoughts on these cards individually. Discipline reduces the cooldown of Frostfire Glide by up to 3 seconds when using Elemental Shift. This card is the only way to reduce Frostfire Glide's cooldown without Chronos. While the internal timer is fairly short, I would have rather seen this card scaling lowered from 0.6 seconds scaling to maybe 0.2 seconds, allowing for a 1 second cooldown reduction with each use of Shift. Next, Draconic Will, which is the most talked about card getting the timer treatment. The card reduces the cooldown of Infernal Cannon and Frost Bomb by up to 3 seconds when Elemental Shift is used. Even though many are saying this card is dead and should never be used, I personally never had it that high in my builds. In my opinion, Heatsink and Cooling Runes were the stronger of Imani's secondary reset cards, both of which were untouched and actually got stronger with the base cooldowns on the secondaries going to 13 seconds. So yeah, if you want to maintain the stance swap reset style, pick those two cards. You'll definitely have room now that the old affinity is in the base kit. As for Draconic Will, like Discipline, I would have rather seen the scaling be lowered from 0.6 to 0.2 seconds to allow for rapid swap resets. Last of the internal timer changes is Elemental Barrier, which heals Imani for up to 250 health when using Elemental Shift. Of the cards getting the internal timer treatment, I think this is the worst defender. The card was already pretty weak before. I do understand the worry of Imani having decent self-healing, now that you're more likely to have the loadout points to afford this card. But 250 health every 5 seconds is laughable. I would have rather seen the card's scaling go from 50 to maybe 30 or 40 scaling. Or, alternatively, not changed at all. Like I said, when Imani's spamming Elemental Shift for card benefits, she's not contributing damage, which is her main duty as a damage dealer. Overall, I am very happy for these Imani changes. Just reading them has reignited my love for the champion. I can't wait for next patch to discover new strategies with her. Just one small complaint. Yeah, the Infernal Cannon momentum bug, the one killing the ability, yeah, it's not mentioned in the patch notes anywhere. Not one, but both of my mains are getting buffed. Terminus is up next. Now when you activate Reanimate, the cooldown of Shatterfall will be reset. Can I just say, I love these Overwatch-like changes to the ultimates, where ammo gets refilled or certain abilities get cooldown resets. I think it's great and improves the flow of the champions affected a lot. That being said, while helpful, I think I would have preferred to see Term Siphon get a reset when ulting, instead of Shatterfall. This way when you die, you can immediately defend yourself if you ran out of Siphon beforehand. I guess the goal with the Shatterfall reset is that if you're about to die with ult up, you could purposely dive into the enemy team and then have an escape ready to go when you come back. Hey, my man Term has been struggling, so I will take what I can get. Another change for Term, and that's to the Playing God card. This is the card that heals you based on damage absorbed from Power Siphon. The scaling is going up from 3 to 5%. I'm really interested to try the buffed version of this card. As you guys might know, I've started work on my complete Terminus guide, and one point of discussion will be the champion's cards. Playing God is a card I like the idea of, but ultimately felt unimpactful due to its low scaling. Now at 25% capped out, it might be pretty noticeable. Next is Willow. Seedling cooldown is going from 15 to 13 seconds, and Wand of Overgrowth ammo is going from 8 to 9. Okay. That's not really fixing her problem, which is a lack of weapon damage without Blast Flower. They really did the same mistake twice, buffing both Ashe and Willow, but not actually addressing their issues. Vatu's dash is having its damage reduction lowered from 50% to 25%, which is fair. Maybe now they could start buffing his underplayed talents? Come on, you guys did it for your baby Androxus. Last of the balance changes is for Yagarath. Form Swap's cooldown is going from 4 to 2 seconds, which I think is fine. Like Imani and other stance swapping champs, I think short cooldowns on the stance swapping ability is needed for good gameplay flow. That's it for balance. Overall, besides Imani and maybe Furia Cherish, there's little of note here, which can be a good or bad thing based on your perspective. That's not it for this patch, folks, because next is a change which for some reason isn't in the patch notes despite how major it is. The introduction of crossplay into Ranked. Now, regardless if you play on controller or keyboard, you can be matched together in Ranked. I am of a neutral stance on this. On the positive side, this should hopefully decrease long queue times, which Ranked suffers a lot from. Additionally, normal casual matches already have crossplay enabled, and when the matchmaking works well, you usually can't tell who's a PC player or a console player. On the negative side, champions that are deemed strong differ pretty heavily on console versus PC. I'm already thinking of instances where a console player is in charge of the draft and ends up banning what would be weak picks on PC, like Talus for example. With the console bans covered, there's nothing stopping the enemy team from taking strong PC champs. In general, mobility has an edge over console players, as they can only face the mobility so fast due to controller limitations. So, will this lead to mobility champions being dominant in ranked? And then because of the balanced team's insistence on balancing this game around the dwindling rank scene, would those same champions get questionable nerfs or reworks? Definitely gonna have to wait and see on this. I'll be waiting a long time on that though, because I have no desire to play ranked this season. The last change I want to talk about is Paladins dropping the Nintendo Switch. The Midnight Masquerade patch will be the last patch that Switch players have access to. Afterwards, the game will be pulled from the console. To any Switch players watching, please make sure to link your high-res and Nintendo accounts so you don't lose your skins and goodies. That is, if you decide to stay. I'm certain there's tons of Switch players who have no other way to play Paladins. For them, the game is just gone. And that really sucks, especially if you put money into this game. In my opinion, Paladins should have never gone to the Switch in the first place. It was a whole controversy back in 2018 when this was announced, as the game had to drop its beta tag to be allowed on the eShop, when it was, and still is, in a bug-ridden state. I know from Switch players in my community that the game would crash constantly, like every other match constantly. The devs did mention that the Switch's weaker hardware made it the recipient of lots of bugs and crashing. Hopefully, with support being dropped, the bug fixing efforts can be allocated elsewhere. Hopefully. And that's my review of the Midnight Masquerade patch. A mediocre update that I will probably play very little of due to its removal of my favorite game mode. Hey, maybe I'll have time to finish the Overwatch retrying series now. What are your thoughts on this update? Let me know down below. Don't forget to clap that like button and laser down that sub button. Snatching the bell is also a great way to stay in the loop. As always, I'm YellowNinja, and peace.